What you have before you tonight is the Paradise Path Task Force had identified several orphan paths and just spaces that are city-owned, right-of-ways, places around Moscow where they would like to have more identification as pathways and possible improvements to those. And I will introduce Margaret Littlejohn, Chair of the Paradise Path Task Force. She has a presentation here for you, and we're here for any questions that you have. Okay, Margaret?
Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you, Dwight, and happy to be here, Mayor and City Council. We have taken these orphan paths through various commissions to get their approval to take it forward to you. So we have 4 of them that we would like to bring forward today. And the main thing that we would like to do is add some signs to identify these locations as public pathways, and so that the residents of Moscow know that they're available to use to get to school or businesses or wherever they need to go. And we're suggesting some minor improvements to hopefully improve the safety if city engineering recommends that. And we also want to offer our services as members of the Paradise Path Task Force to help implement these improvements. So we have 4 that were approved to bring forward to for your consideration. And probably the simplest of those is Van Buren dead end between E and Morton Streets, which is used currently by walkers, and you see some photos there. Let's see if the concrete has a break in it at the end of Van Buren, so people can walk through that, although it's not identified in any way. And you see on the map there where that is, the end of Van Buren, and there's East Morton at the end. So that is all we would like to do for that location, is to sign it on both ends so that people know it's available for use. And it is street right-of-way. The orange response there at the bottom of the slide was from the city. The second one is Jim Lyle Rotary Park between Vandal Drive and Garfield Street. There's a somewhat steep pathway that goes from Vandal Drive down to Garfield Street, just north of Jim Lyle Park. And we would like to make some improvements to that if needed, but we would at least like to sign it on both ends. And here you see the ends of the trail from Garfield end, the upper right there, and you're looking down from Vandal Drive on the upper left. That's the pathway, and you can see there's a standpipe there. There's also a sinkhole right next to it, which might need to be addressed, and it is city right-of-way. The third one is Peachtree and Virginia Avenue. From the Peachtree end, there is a homeowner with a sidewalk that goes on 2 sides, and then dead ends and becomes a dirt pathway up to Virginia Avenue, end of the trail. And from the Virginia Avenue end, it's almost not really noticeable as a trail. So, excuse me, our plan is to sign that so that people know on both ends that it is available for use. And the fourth one is Mountain View connection to Thatuna Street. And I think most of you have probably seen this one since it connects onto Mountain View on the east end and then follows what is a possible street right-of-way, a possible future street. Some photos of the ends of that from the tuna on the upper left there. You can see the barricades on the Mountain View end, which have a break in them, and the sidewalk ends just adjacent to that. And it's just a dirt pathway, but is currently used by walkers and bikers. And it can be quite muddy at times. Again, it's not signed for public use, and if it were to be developed as a street right-of-way or a through street, certainly it could accommodate a sidewalk or other pathway adjacent to it. So we're just asking for your approval of these 4 pathways to be signed. And if city engineering agrees that something needs to be done about the surface, we haven't, thoroughly investigated what is best. I mean, obviously, bark and gravel have disadvantages for bikers because they can wash out or the tires can sink into them and cause an accident. We don't want to do that. So again, we're just asking to sign those pathways with wording that the city agrees to and make minor improvements if needed, and we're willing to help. Thank you
for your work on the Paradise Path Task Force and for your presentation tonight, Margaret. Well done.
You're welcome.
Walter, you have a question for Margaret?
Probably more statements than questions, but if I may.
Well, okay, and I do want to hear from Sue, who chaired the committee at which this was discussed as well, but go ahead.
Which committee? I'm the liaison to Paradise Path.
I thought, didn't admin?
It came to admin.
Okay.
Admin had that discussion.
Let Sue can go.
Sure, anybody have questions for Margaret before we proceed with that part? Okay, thank you, appreciate your presentation.
Well, I got one.
Oh, you do?
I remember when I was
On the
on
back.
Paradise Path Task Force, as the liaison, we had developed some signage you guys had for the path. Are these the type of signs you're thinking of, the same type that you guys developed for the Paradise Path?
Yeah, I mean, just something that says maybe public pathway, and I know there's an issue of the risk to the city, but they are all city-owned already.
Already hanging out there.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And Sue, the administrative committee took a look at this last week.
Yeah, and Tim and I were very much in favor, and Wayne had some concerns about improvements being liabilities. But when I was liaison over a year ago, Joel Hamilton had already done a little PowerPoint of, and from transportation, as yes, it goes, the poor Paradise Path, it goes through so many hoops. But Joel Hamilton and on the Planning and Zoning Commission as liaison to transportation had done a PowerPoint presentation of about 13 different found spaces. And Tom Grundon did a van tour of the entire commission, and I was on that tour and saw all of them, and these 4 were definitely the highlights. And so 2 of us were in favor and felt like they are already public property. We already have some liability, and they're ancestral game trails now, and may as well indicate. And one that was interesting is the Peachtree one If you go back, can you go back to that slide on the Peachtree Street? People weren't sure where the public pathway was, and so they would come up that cul-de-sac and kind of go up the driveway of the house on the left and cut around up on the hillside up, and didn't know which was actually the public right-of-way. So just naming it as a public right-of-way, I think, is fine. But that's where we're at.
Okay. And I know Gary also attended that meeting. Gary, you have something to add to this?
Nothing to add from me, but one of the questions the committee had was they wanted the legal liabilities looked at, asked the city attorney to look at that. I think he's got an opinion he'd like to share with you.
Okay. Rod?
Madam Mayor, councilors, there was a concern about whether if we made improvements, the city made improvements on these property, if it would create liability. But under Idaho code, when you're dealing with public or private lands where no fee is charged, there is no duty of care to keep the premises safe. There's no duty to warn if they're dangerous. There's no duty if you make improvements that you have to even maintain them after you do that. It doesn't create a liability if there has never been a liability there. There would only be a liabilities if you create a hazard that would cause danger to others.
Okay. Thank you.
And signing them doesn't increase any liability?
It has no liability, it just probably guides people in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you. Walter?
Thank you, ma'am. I'll start just off by saying I'm generally in favor of the proposal. I went out and walked every one of these over the weekend. Margaret, would you go back to the first one, please?
Sure.
Briefly, this is probably the easiest one. This is level for the most part. It's got a little bit of a side slope on it. And with a little gravel to make it all weather would probably be a very useful cut through for people that, I don't know where they're going, to the city shop maybe or somewhere. But anyway, but to get between one place and the other, it would work fairly well with a little bit of work. The second one, if you would, that's relatively inclined. I won't call it steep, but it is inclined. It's dirt. It's got to turn into, quagmire anytime it rains. It does have a pretty large hole just on the far side of that pipe you see in the upper left picture that needs to be repaired. And then up at the top, if you look at the bottom right picture, this trail goes up here and it points right toward the paved end of public.
Vandal.
A Vandal. And there's a nice wide hole between a barricade that's here on the other side of these trees and a barricade on this side of the trees. But you can't get through because of the trees, so everybody kind of crawls around apparently and slips around the trees to get back to the pavement. A little bit of work would make it a straight shot, but it does need in my opinion, would need to be an asphalt path to really work well for what it's serving as. Can you go to the third one?
It got bumped. Maybe the people in the back can make it go.